Tonight, the Republican candidates for president will face off in Milwaukee for their fourth primary debate. Donald Trump and Ben Carson remain ahead in the race and will take center stage.
The debate promises to be interesting, to say the least, given that Carson is facing questions about his credibility. Marco Rubio is facing scrutiny about his personal finances, and Governor Jeb Bushs is under pressure to shake off his slump. Joining us from Washington is Rebecca Berg. She is a national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Hi, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me, Vlad.
So who has the most at stake tonight? I mean, understanding that they all want to be president of the United States, but who is this a live or die moment, and which candidate would that be for?
Well, I'll be watching two candidates in particular. Obviously, the stakes are high for all of them, and they all have something to prove. But I'll be watching Jeb Bushs, first of all, because we saw in the last debate that he didn't do very well at the moment when he needed to the most. His campaign has been flailing. He's been trying to mount a comeback and show that he has some momentum to keep donors and supporters from jumping to one of the other candidates, and in particular, Marco Rubio. But last time in the debate, he didn't show a lot of energy. He didn't dominate in the way he needed to, and he tried to attack Marco Rubio and failed. So he's going to have to make up for a lot of ground tonight and try to reestablish his footing in this race. On the other hand, we have Ben Carson, one of the front runners in the race, who, as you mentioned, has been coming under attack lately. I will be watching to see how he handles any barbs that are thrown his way by some of the other candidates. And I'll be interested to see whether the other candidates actually take the bait and try to attack him.
Well, you know, speaking of attacks, I'm just curious, with all the criticism about the most recent past debates, do you really feel as though this time the candidates and even the moderators will make a point to stay on the issues?
Well, we've heard from some of the Fox Business moderators that they intend to. We'll see if they actually follow through. But the pressure is on them, certainly. We saw what happened after the CNBC debate with the RNC coming out, suspending NBC for now for their February debate, suspending that partnership. And of course, the campaigns threatened a mutiny, a full-out mutiny of these debates. And so there's a lot of pressure on Fox Business to keep this really sober, really serious. And I think they recognize that.
Rebecca, given that there are some very serious issues at stake in this upcoming presidential election, are any of the criticisms that have been leveled against Dr. Carson for exaggerations, perhaps, or being forgetful in his biography, or even with Marco Rubio and his credit card situation, which a lot of Americans can relate to, personal finances, are those things sticking? And clearly they don't seem to matter as much when it comes to the issues, but are they sticking?
Well, we'll see if they stick. As Chris Christie said up in New Hampshire this week when I was following him around on the campaign trail, each of these candidates is responsible for representing truthfully their own personal stories. And what an election is about when it comes down to it is voters trusting the candidate they choose to support, because they can agree or disagree on policies, but ultimately it's a character decision. Do they trust this person to represent their policies truthfully, represent themselves truthfully, and carry out their policies in an honest way as an honest broker? And so when you have these stories about candidates, not representing their own stories truthfully, that could stick, because it might show voters that they're not the honest brokers that they believe them to be. But what we've seen with Ben Carson, at least with this story about West Point, is that because the original report wasn't completely accurate, now he's actually been able to actually energize some of his supporters into this backlash against the reporters and the media. So maybe he has the upper hand on this one, but there will be more to come.
You know, Rubio, according to analysts, had a fairly strong performance in the last debate, and maybe his poll numbers have benefited from that. What does he have to do tonight to keep that momentum going, and will the other candidates put some pressure on him given that fact?
I would expect to see Marco Rubio under some more pressure tonight, but all he has to do is sort of keep on trucking. He's on the right path right now, and we've seen him perform strongly in each of these debates. So all he has to do tonight is have a few good moments, stay on message, and not fall victim to any attacks from other candidates. But what we saw in the CNBC debate a few weeks ago was that he was very agile in defending himself against Jeb Bushs, and I have reason to believe we would see much of the same tonight if anyone goes after him.
Yeah, and Rebecca, we've seen Marco Rubio do exceedingly well in the polls after each of his debate performances. He's been slowly rising in those numbers and is now in the rearview mirror of Dr. Carson and Donald Trump. But the New York Times has a report out today that says that Jeb Bush and his allies are willing to spend up to $30 million to attack Marco Rubio's reputation. This is his one-time mentee. Is this a strategy that will work?
You know, it could, because negative advertising does work, but it has the potential to backfire before it even has the chance to work. So what we've seen in the past couple of weeks is that some Jeb Bush donors have started to reevaluate their support for him, and his attacks on Marco Rubio have actually expedited that decision-making process. One donor, Brian Ballard in Florida, decided publicly within the past week to jump ship to Marco Rubio because he thought it was inappropriate for Jeb Bush to be attacking what he called one of the rising stars of the party in Marco Rubio. And so there's this sense that you need to do whatever it takes to win in a primary, but you don't want to turn off the people who would support you, especially when there's so many other choices out there for Republican voters on the moderate side of the spectrum. And so Jeb Bush and his campaign and his super PAC, I guess, in this case, have to tread a little bit lightly because people like Marco Rubio, and they might see Jeb as going a little overboard in this case.
Rebecca Berg with Real Clear Politics. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And stick with CBSN tonight. We're going to have full coverage of the fourth Republican debate starting at 7 p.m. Eastern, and even more analysis tomorrow morning. That is starting at 7 a.m. Eastern.